All right, hey Cam.
Hey, how's it going?
There we go. Gallery view. All right, so we're back. We're back for more talking about
Round
why kids
two.
can't read. Yeah, why kids can't read and why this matters now more than ever.
Yeah.
So when I hear something like why kids can't read, I'd say that's BS because I used to say this. Because it's like, well, I read the title of this video. What do you mean? What do
Mhm.
you mean I can't read or kids can't read? Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are you talking about, Cam? What do
Oh,
you
you're
mean?
asking me? I thought that was a rhetorical.
Well, I mean, I'm starting to really understand
Yeah.
why kids can't,
Yeah.
and I see it firsthand, and I know you've had
Yeah.
even more extensive experience with this. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, in terms of what we can talk about today, um, it kind of piggybacks on what we talked about the last time, which we have that video up. I know it's on your page. I have it on my playlist on my page as well, on my YouTube channel. And that whole discussion was really more around the fact that even as adults, we're not really processing information at the level that we could be. And especially when you compare like an average person's ability to read and process information to someone like Bill Gates or Einstein or Elon Musk or something like that, you can obviously see a difference. So when somebody says, "Oh no, I know how to read," I'm like, okay, so you're able to process information and understand things just like Bill Gates. And so what happens is we have this sort of idea that those people are special, and then there's everybody else, and not realizing that there is a difference, but understanding how we actually learn. What we've seen with TechnoTutor is that we can make a difference in that, and we can take somebody's processing ability and raise it up. And we've seen that with many people, right? And so that's really what I wanted to get into today, was more like what's the problems that we're seeing at a young age in the education system with teaching children to read. And most people they might be aware that there's problems in the education system, but they're not really understanding that there's like fundamental problems. And even the ones who do see that there's fundamental problems, they tend to more blame it just on the structure of school, not really understanding it's not just the education system in the sense of school, it's also what's done at home. And that fundamentally from the very beginning there's problems, right? So there's a reason why Bill Gates is where he's at in terms of his ability to process information versus somebody else. And there's a lot of factors that go into it for Bill Gates, because he's sort of like a random product of our entire system versus someone engineered that for someone to be like that, right? But there's like clues when you look at Bill Gates and you look at Elon Musk and people like that. There's clues and there's points that are common between them. And so if you know how to do that on purpose, then you can support a person to go to a way higher level than they would just left to the system itself, right? Which kind of screws most people over. And I think, right now, what's today, March 26th, right? So we're like in the middle of this whole COVID-19 thing, right? Everybody's at home. And I think a lot of people are starting to question like a lot of things. I don't know who is or isn't questioning things, but I think that there's sort of, for many people at least, this realization that the way we have our economic system structured, our education system, because kids are sitting at home now and they're on teleconference with their teachers, and I can understand that if you're in high school, but if you're in kindergarten, what's the point of that? Like, what is the kid doing in the kindergarten classroom that is of any value if they're doing it one-on, you know what I mean? Like, what's the point of that? So, especially knowing what I know in terms of how children are taught to read. That's the most important thing that you get out of your education more than anything else. Of course,
it's the
not
ability to learn how to read. You're saying
it's the ability to read effectively, and then also to remain open to learning new things. When I say open, I don't just mean in terms of your mindset. I mean actually able to learn new things very easily. Like basically the first or second time you see something, ideally the first time you see something, you can then start applying it. You might make mistakes, but then you start working through those mistakes.
yeah, that reminds me of with books, in like a lot of my peers and just throughout my whole life. Like I've read books, but I constantly had to underline and highlight and read it again and read it again, and then maybe I get lucky and it would apply in my life. But it was like one moment it hit me where I realized, okay, why do I have to keep rereading these sentences? It's like I tune out. Like,
Yeah.
I doubt Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, when they're reading their business reports, they're not rereading those same sentences. was like, something's not right here, even though I'd read like 60, 70 books a year. And now I see, oh, this is what actual reading is. It's you
Yeah.
process it once and then you apply it in your life. And I don't need to read the book again. I'd still get benefit, but I don't need to actually grasp it.
Yeah, the only reason why, if you've integrated your vocabulary effectively, the only reason why you would need to read it again would be because there's other concepts or words that what you're reading is assuming you know that you don't know. So you'd have to go and like read something. Okay, it makes sense to the degree that I understand these words, but there's some concept I don't know about. So let me go study that and come back. And that makes sense. But what most people do is they read something and they're totally tuning out. And then they have to go, and then they go back to read it. And a perfect example of this is when I used to tutor. What I would do is I would, you'd have like the SAT, for example, here in the States. And, there'd be like a reading passage where you have to read the stuff and then you have to read the question. And then based on the question, it was like a comprehension question or something like that, right? And so I would have the student read the question, okay? And then they would be looking at the answers. And then I would be like, okay, so they wouldn't know the answer. They'd be struggling with it, right? So I would say, okay, well, let me ask you, what's the question asking you to figure out? And they would be like, oh, okay, hold on. And they would go and read it. And I'm like, how do you not already know? Like, if you're already looking at the answer choices, how do you have you not already totally figured out what is the question asking? Now you're already, stop looking at the answer choices, figure out what it's saying, right? And of course, like you're pointing out, that should be automatic if your reading ability is developed effectively. Shouldn't have to read it more than once to understand what it's saying. But you see this over and over again when you're working with students like in middle school and high school, where they'll read something and then you ask them, okay, so explain to me what it said. And they'll be like, hold on. And they go back and read it again. And you're like, what were you doing the first time? Right? So they weren't processing it. That's the point. They're taught to just read over it in their minds, probably somewhere else. And they're not really doing it as an exercise for themselves anyways. It's like there's some external stimulus or motivation as to why they're doing it. So that one of the things before, I was focused on techno tutor was when I would work with students, because I was trying to get them to be able to do what I could just do pretty much naturally. When I say naturally, I don't mean like I was born with it, but I mean like it was happening without me having to put any effort into it. Like I would read the question and I would understand what it means. So what I would try to tell them to do is I would say, well, okay, try this. I want you to read the passage or the question or whatever, but I want you to read it as if you're trying to understand it. So then they would actually focus when they're reading. Now, it would still be limited, which is partly little experiences like that as a tutor, I started to question, like, why am I not able to really help these students? Like they just can't read the book like I can. Because like when I would be in school, I wouldn't rely on a teacher. I wouldn't rely on a tutor or anyone else. I would just read the books and understand. If I wasn't interested, I wouldn't, right? So I'm not saying that I was the best student because there were certain things where I had limitations within my own vocabulary. And so I didn't have an interest in certain subjects. And that also is, that is also due to the way the school system is set up and a lot of other factors and like things from my childhood, so there's a lot of context to that. So you can't blame one particular thing from that perspective. But my point is, if it was something that I had an interest in, I would read it quite easily. The problem with that statement, though, is a lot of times the educator thinks, well, now I have to make it interesting. And if I can make it interesting, the students will understand it. No, it's actually the other way around. When you understand things naturally, they tend to be more interesting. Right? It's just true. Like even something that seems mundane can have a lot of complexity and nuance to it, and it can be fascinating, right? And when you look at like poets and scientists and inventors, and they describe, like looking at a tree for an hour and being fascinated by it. You know what I mean? So there's beauty and wonder in things when you focus and when you have that ability that you wouldn't see otherwise, and therefore there's nothing to be interesting, if that makes sense, right? So this is part of the problem in terms of what we could talk about today is just looking at some basic points as to how we're teaching children to read, because how you're taught to read as a child affects how you read now. It's not like suddenly you were taught as a child and then one day you wake up and now you read a totally different way. It's based on that, right? Completely. So how we read as adults is fundamentally affected by how we were taught as children. And this is in no way, anything I say is in no way to blame anybody or to like say it's some kind of grand conspiracy to keep us stupid. That those things may exist, but that's not my point. My point is, up until now, nobody has really put it all together in the way that we have with TechnoTutor and say, this is, according to all the research, according to all the science, what we produce with TechnoTutor is the thing that is being said is the way that you would want a child to learn how to read, or that you would, the result you're trying to get to, right? The method isn't so important if you get to the result. But what we found is when you understand how the mind works and how the body, the physical body learns information and so forth, that's what all of what we're doing is based on with TechnoTutor, right? So yes, the methodology does matter, but what I mean is people can argue all day long about the methodology, but none of the current methodologies within the school system or in education generally produces the result that the system itself says is the result that's being sought. You see what I mean? So in other words, we can produce the result that the system says is what makes a good reader, what makes an effective reader, when the system itself can't produce that, although they know what is the result they're looking for, right? So we could go into some of that. I don't know if you have any points you want to look at.
Yeah. And when you say the result the system is looking for, is that like Department of Education reading standards? Like by a child is this age, they should be able to read this many words per minute, understand this vocabulary. Is that what you're referring to?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's hard to say like this specific institution says these are the standards. And why I say that is because, for example, in America, we have a Department of Education, but it doesn't determine the education system in each state, right? Because we have that separation in the education system. In fact, it's, as far as I know, I mean, things change all the time, but as far as I know, it's illegal for that, for the government to, for the federal government to impose an educational curriculum. And so, you know, you might have heard of Common Core, but they had to go and get the states to want to adopt it. And part of what they did was they incentivized them by saying, we'll give money to states that adopt this. And so they got more funding and so forth. But so they have to be kind of like sneaky about how they do it. The government can't say by law, every state has to impose this curriculum.
Got it.
There's pros and cons to that. But the reality is the fact that it's even up for debate what should be taught and how children should be educated, to me, is it's a crime. Like it's just total stupidity. But I do understand why it's occurring. And I don't necessarily think it's always because people have bad intentions. It's because they don't know and no one's really coordinating it. And so when you look at, for example, being in America, in the United States of America, our solution is to everything, generally speaking, is business, right? You take someone like Elon Musk, who is from South Africa. Why did he come to the United States and build PayPal and Tesla and all these other companies, right? There's a reason for that. Like this is the birthplace of real innovation from that perspective, right? And so historically, you know, in the sense of since the beginning of the United States, right? It's where the real creativity comes from. And it has to do with the fact, I think, that we value individual freedom. There's a lot of other factors that go into it. But unfortunately, the way we're educating children is not honoring that. It's sort of, for lack of a better word, dumbing our generations of children down to the point where we're going to lose that thing that makes America so special. And really, once that's gone, the world doesn't have that anymore. It's lost, you know? And so from a certain perspective, not to go too negative, but when you have a population that's very low education, low vocabulary, low emotional stability, which stems from an effective education, the only thing you can really do is impose a top-down authoritarian sort of type of government. Because like we talked about in our last chat, you know, the red pill of education, to have a direct democracy, the average IQ has to be well above what it is right now, even in the United States. And so right now, what's happening is the education levels are going down to the point where even the representative democracy that we have right now is no longer going to be possible, right? And so there's a lot we could go into within that, but really, when I'm talking about what the research says, okay, let me give you an example. Right here I have, I think you can see it here. I have the Hidden Books of Reading Research. There's 4 volumes. And then I have 2, there's actually 3 volumes of, I don't know if you can see those, the early literacy research. I have all 3. I just don't know where the 3rd one is at the moment. It's somewhere. But when I say that, I mean, this is like all the research that's been done on literacy up through, I want to say like 2010 or 2015 or something like that, right? So every decade they publish a new set of research based on the past 10 decades, or past decade rather, past 10 years. But even that, I'm always keeping my eye on what's the current research. So for example, I'll share something real quick right here. Let's see, I think I have it pulled up. Here, I'll share this just so you can see an example of what I mean. So can you see that?
Yeah.
Right, ending the reading wars, reading acquisition from novice to expert. And I have highlighted, this is Department of Cognitive Science at this, I don't know where this university is, but it's also in partnership with University of London, University of Oxford, and so forth. And as you can see here, it's over on the right side. This was 2018, right? And they're still debating about what's the correct way to educate children, right? Or when I say educate, what I really mean is the correct way to teach reading, just that specifically.
Okay.
Right? Trying to argue in this that, the science has proven there's one best way to do it, but it's actually not the case. And so unfortunately, someone will look at this and say, well, Oxford's saying it, this must be the answer. But when you actually read it, you'll see that they don't have a solution, right? They still don't know how to get to what they are saying is the result that everyone recognizes as the best way, the result that is best, but the method to get there, they still don't know how to do that, right?
And Cameron, what is that result that is best for the kid?
Well, one thing that the experts can agree on is that the result that is best is that I'm just going to stop sharing this. One result they can agree on is that the ability to automatically recognize words, okay, effortlessly, automatically, without having to think about it at all, and to immediately to know their meanings at an unconscious level. When I say unconscious, it doesn't mean that you couldn't say what the meaning is, but you can process it unconsciously. So there's no thought involved. You just read something to understand it, right? And everyone, I think, even with just basic common sense, can say, well, that makes obvious sense. Like, if you can read something and you don't have to slow down and think about what each word means, you don't have to even think about what is that word. Like, when you see the spelling of it, you're like, what word is that? Like, you already know it, right? The difference between someone who is like a novice investor in the stock market versus Warren Buffett. There's a lot of information he kind of takes for granted that he just knows and is obvious to him when he's looking at things, versus, the new novice person coming into it where they've memorized a lot and they've read all the books that he might recommend, but they're still trying to think about even very, really basic stuff that he's just already mastered, right? And so when they did the studies, there was some studies done by, I think the guy's name is Stanovich, in the 70s, if I'm not mistaken. And they looked at what is it that makes someone a poor reader versus a good reader, an effective reader. Their initial assumption was that somebody who is an effective reader, they use a lot of context clues when they're reading something to figure out the meanings and the words that they don't know. So when they're reading something, if there's words they don't know, they would use like context and contextual.
Yeah, I remember being taught that by my teachers because I sucked at reading.
Right, and that's a fundamental part of what they call whole language theory, right? Is the idea that we're going to use context and so forth. And we can probably get into later why that is, because there's a reason that was developed in the 60s, as opposed to the phonics method. So these are the two main approaches that are usually touted as that one is the answer versus the other. Technotutor is neither of those, but combines both, okay, and goes further. It produces the result that's being sought after, which is the end to which phonics and whole language are the means, right?
And so that end is the ability to automatically and effortlessly just process words.
Right, and for example, just to give you some, the listeners or the watchers, something that they could look at, this is a book called Beginning to Read. I don't know if you can see that one, but I have multiple copies of this on my bookshelf. I bought a bunch of them just so I have them, I can give them to people. But this was written by Marilyn Yeager Adams, right? And it was printed by MIT Press, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, right? And in the 90s, I believe. Hey, and I even have a signed copy, check it out. Although it's dedicated to someone named Karen, I don't know who that is. But I got this one on Amazon, right? But 1990 is the copyright on it, 1990, from MIT. And the very first, and so the foreword is by this guy named P. David Pearson, at the Center for the Study of Reading at, University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, which is like a world-renowned center for the study of reading, okay? In fact, I know you're familiar with the Johnson O'Connor research, right? His annotated bibliography was published by that same center, right?
Okay.
You can see it kind of start connecting the dots, right?
Yeah.
So in other words, this is not just some random thing. I mean, it's produced by MIT. The forward is by the, probably the most famous like center for studying reading and so forth. And, so it's got the endorsement there. But then the very first chapter is called Putting Word Recognition into Perspective, right? That's the very first chapter. And I'll just show you another example. Okay, so here's the first handbook of reading research, and it was produced, I think, let me double check. Oh, look, editor, P. David Pearson. I actually just noticed that. Okay, but I'm just looking to see, you'll see chapter 8 here is dedicated to word recognition, right? So it's a fundamental thing. And then this book itself, the one I was referring to here, is one of the most cited books in these handbooks of reading research, right? Especially in the earlier years, because that was printed in the 90s, right? The first section of the handbook on reading research is more about the history of reading research and things like that, and a review of different things. So when they get into, it says part 2, basic processes, the state of the art. It talks about models of the reading process, but then the first thing it gets into in terms of actual mechanics is word recognition. So you can see how important that concept is within this whole thing. And so why I bring it up is because I'll just give you a quick point within here. This book is really great because she gives a really great analogy in the beginning, talking about how you drive a car and how when you become effective at driving a car, and I think everyone who knows how to drive a car can relate to this, you get to a point where you don't have to think about it anymore. You don't have to think about pushing the accelerator. And for those who learn to drive on a standard, a manual transmission like I did, at a certain point, you don't think about the clutch even. You don't think about the shifting. It's all automatic. And so it can be challenging to try to teach somebody who is learning for the first time because you take so much of it for granted, right? But she uses this great analogy about learning to drive a car and how it eventually becomes automatic. And that's how reading has to become. But it's even deeper than that, because most people would think, well, I read like that, right? But if someone were to give you a book on quantum mechanics and said, read that, you said the average person, do you think that they would be like, oh yeah, I can read that, no problem? Or they'd be like, well, the first sentence, they'd be like, and they'd be trying to pronounce the words, you know what I mean? And if it's not quantum mechanics, there's some book that anybody is like, I can't read that book, I can't understand it, I can't process it automatically. And try reading Nietzsche is a perfect example, right? If you read one sentence of Nietzsche, that could take you like a day to like process. Do you know what I mean? And in fact, Jordan Peterson has a whole video where he talks about, just breaking down one paragraph from Nietzsche. It's like an hour long or something like that, right? The point is, the words themselves, when put together, can mean a lot, right? But just from the perspective of just automatic word recognition, this analogy that she gives about driving a car, think of it more like this. If you had to think about, take your car engine, imagine the pistons and how they're firing. Like there's a spark plug inside the cylinder, it compresses the gas, and then the spark plug ignites it and it shoots the piston up, and it does this whole process, and it's really fast. If you had to push a button to fire each spark plug every time you wanted it to happen while you're driving, if you had to consciously do that, that would be literally impossible. Right? Literally impossible, right?
Yeah. You waste all your energy and attention on that.
And that's just one little thing. And you have to do like 100 times a second or whatever it is, right? So that's just one little thing. Plus all the other things going on in the car. So there's levels in which your body's processing information that are occurring like that have to happen. And so whenever you are looking at a word you don't know, there's things happening at that kind of a level that when you know it automatically are happening, just like when you're driving the car, like the cylinders are firing, you're not even thinking about it. But when you don't know the word at the unconscious automatic word recognition level, it's like trying to drive the car and you're trying to push the button. Okay.
Sure.
And so that's why so many people say they hate reading. In fact, I saw something recently that said there's 30 million adults that are considered functionally illiterate,
Yeah.
which is hard to fathom, right? But when you're in a certain social class in our society, you tend to only associate with those kind of people. And so you don't notice that there's people who can't read. You know, it's like, it's so obvious to you. You take it for granted. So she uses that analogy of the car. And I think it's a great analogy. And I'll just read this one quick paragraph. I have it highlighted here. She says that texts that are unfamiliar in concept or difficult in wording or structure require active attention for comprehension. But to the extent that you're directing that attention to the mechanics of the system, it is not available to support your understanding. Only if your ability to recognize and capture the meanings of the words on a page is rapid, effortless, and automatic will you have available the cognitive energy and resources upon which skillful comprehension depends. Only then can you control and reflect upon your journey. And it's interesting because I'll read that to people and I'll go, so what did that mean? And they'll go, what? So like literally they're not processing that statement. So if anybody heard that and they're like, what? Just go back and listen to it again. Because I just summed up everything I just said, which is in essence, your ability to recognize words has to be automatic, right? Just like right now, if I'm talking and you're only processing a little bit of what I'm saying, it's not making as much sense. If I was speaking, you know, in Mandarin Chinese, the people who are only English speaking are like, they're not understanding anything because none of that's processing. Now take somebody who's in school learning Mandarin Chinese and they're like picking up a few of the words I'm saying. They're like, oh yeah, I heard that word, but they don't really understand completely what I'm saying. That's what it's like for most people to read just that sentence I just read or those couple sentences. They're like, what? Because if I ask you exactly what did that mean, they're like, not sure. You know, they have to go back or they might get the gist of it and might get something, but they have to read it again. They're like, now I'm going to listen this time. Okay, let me read it again, right? But the reason I bring that up is because this is just page number 5 of this book, Beginning to Read. And it's making the point that that is the end goal of all reading education, or it should be the goal, is so that you can automatically recognize words. Now, automatically recognizing words is from a metaphorical standpoint, is how all learning should be, is how all functioning should be. Like when I'm and especially with what's going on right now with this whole COVID-19 thing, many people are realizing that they've taken just breathing for granted because now they have this respiratory illness, some people, and their body's like having trouble breathing, right? And they have to be on these ventilators and so forth, right? But that's something that we take for granted. Our body does it automatically for us. You know, every single breath, every heartbeat, every chemical reaction going on in our body is doing that automatically for us unconsciously. That's the level at which information processing occurs. So if you go back to that talk we were having the other day on the red pill of education, when we're talking about information processing, we're talking about it from this perspective, automatic recognition. It's like, have you ever met somebody and like maybe you were a little bit in awe of them, and so you weren't really yourself, you were kind of just in their presence, you know what I mean? And so you're not really even processing what's happening, you know? Like I've met celebrities before in the past where I'm like, I don't even know what I'm saying, you know? Yeah. That's what it's like whenever you can't read effectively. It's like, it may not feel that way, but it's like you're reading this, but you may, like if it's a quantum mechanics book, you're just like, whoa, these words are so crazy, wow. But they're just words to a person who has that vocabulary integrated unconsciously. They're just like, it makes perfect sense. And they actually think everyone else is dumb because they just can't understand this, right? But that's why we look up to neuroscientists or surgeons and all these people. We're like, wow, they're so amazing. It's just that they know those words, okay? They're not necessarily any more intelligent, but typically they are, because in this world, if you have a higher intelligence, generally that translates into a faster learning ability. So that means in the beginning, you were picking up on things and getting them quicker, so that by the time your natural ability to just absorb shut down, which it does for most people around the age of 7, you got a lot more than most other people. You see, so you accumulated a lot more data inside your hard drive than other people. So now you're like, but you don't remember any of that. And so what does society say? You're just smarter than everybody else, you see? And so what we're saying is, what if there was a way where you could take any child and give them all the same amount of data? to process it unconsciously, right? Now that person has the same ability to process and the same information at their disposal as somebody else. Guess what? There's no more specialness. There's no more some are smarter and everyone else is just dumb. There's just going to be those really smart elite people who have to run society, and everybody else just pretty much has to go along with it, which is kind of what we've got now, right? So what we're doing is, from a higher purpose perspective, extremely important. But just from the perspective of how does this affect the average person, again, if you have a society where people are low vocabulary, low reading ability, that means they're more easily emotionally manipulated. And so things like the media and the government and politicians and advertising and all kinds of things have a greater effect on people the lower that their reading ability is. Like, well, I don't want to go into all the details about COVID and all that stuff, but the point is, if you think about it, the people who are very well educated right now, they're okay. It's everybody who was reliant on the system for a job that's kind of screwed right now. Bill Gates is just sitting in his home, like, okay, you know what I mean? If you look at it from that great separation point, right? So what we really need right now is a highly educated population that isn't reliant on a system to totally take responsibility for them. Otherwise, they totally melt down. And there's not much we can do at this very moment in time because there's going to be a lot of problems. But what we can do is start preparing people now, as we've been doing over the past few years since we started TechnoTutor, to those who want to prepare themselves and prepare their children for the 21st century, which we're in right now. I mean, you're going to have to take education into your own hands. So I'm just giving you some examples, but you see just from the perspective of how right away at the very beginning of the book, it's laying out what's the key. So you had asked me, who are those experts or who is the system, where are the guidelines? This is the research, right? Mm-hmm. This is it. And the education system recognizes that, but a lot of times the standards that they put in place are reflective of the fact that they don't know how to achieve this for most people. So you don't really want to look at the standards as much as what's the end goal of effective reading. Does that see the difference, right? Yeah. Because the standards in many cases, although sometimes the standards are totally unachievable according to what they know, they'll still have them in place. But many times they dumb things down. So, for example, going back to that point we were talking about with Stanovich, right? And them looking at what is it that the effective readers do, and they thought that they look at words in context and they use context clues to figure out what the words mean. Well, that was in the 70s, and then in the 90s they were already talking about the fact that obviously that's not the case. But even in the Stanovich research, what they figured out was, it's the other way around. Actually, it's the poor readers who use context. Why? Because they don't already know the words. And the effective readers already know the words. How? Right. We don't know, but they just do. And so, decades later, this comes along and is already taking all of that information and that research and taking it for granted and saying, well, we know that the key to effective reading is automatic word recognition. Now, how do we get everyone to that? We don't really know. I mean, that's what they're saying. We know, TechnoTutor, we know, and we have the evidence, we have the proof of it. It's not just theory. It's
you prove it to yourself too. That's what I love it. Is you just test yourself and you're like, okay, I got it.
You can do it for yourself. It's not something you have to believe something, right? You don't have to wait 12 years of education to figure out you're screwed. And I mean, just from that perspective, I'll share something else with you here. Let's see, where is it? Here we go. This is from November of last year. So just not even, I guess 6 months ago or so, right? National Reading Emergency. Educators sound the alarm, the U.S. News and World Report. While scores are still up in math compared to 1990, students are largely back to square one when it comes to reading, other than the highest performing students. So in other words, we're at the lowest reading level since the 90s for the average student. And so does that sound like a system that has it figured out? And guess what? The people who are at the highest level, they seem to be okay. Well, it's like, so nothing's changed. So literally, it's just like the feudal times. It's just like ancient Egypt. It's no different. The people at the top of society are fine. Everybody else is still screwed, right? Yeah.
And for anyone watching this, like, ask yourself, like, do you get it? Why this matters? Especially in a time like now where the job security for so many people is gone, right? Why does it matter that a lot of people can't read? And do you see why it's important to learn how to read? Like Cameron and I are talking about, the automatic effortless level of processing information, not like willing it into existence. I'm going to force myself to get through this book because someone said read Rich Dad Poor Dad. I'm just going to really try hard. It's like, you've got to get yourself to the point where it just makes sense. You pull in the whole meaning of paragraphs at a time instead of word by word.
Right.
That's what's going to get you security.
Doing something with it. Right.
Yeah.
And that should be the real clue as to whether it's automatic or not, is like, when you read it, do you start applying it within the context of where you need to apply it? So that's where you have to be honest with yourself. Okay. So when we test comprehension and reading comprehension in the school, what we're really doing is just testing recall or memorization of facts that were given in a piece of information. Very difficult for the school system to test, okay, when you read this, now can you do something with it? I mean, you remember school, like how much would you actually apply anything, right? Very little, right? Very little. And if there was application, it was more like a cookie cutter, like, okay, we're going to build a rocket in science class, and they give you some basic guidelines, but you're not actually applying any information. And it was always funny to me, in school, we would do the chemistry labs, and then we would be taught the information that we needed to know to do the chemistry lab. Why isn't it the other way around? Why aren't we taught it and mastering the information, and then we go into the lab and we're applying it? It's really weird that it was always like that. Right. It was. I
don't even really remember chemistry class because I hated it because I couldn't comprehend anything.
Right. Exactly.
And I got good grades. Like I graduated from college like cum laude and everything. Like, and I still graduated. I'm like, what do I do with my life? Right. And then thank God I found entrepreneurship and led me to like marketing, and then that led me to finding these guys with TechnoTutor. So
and these things that you're doing like marketing and so forth, you have to know it. Otherwise, you're not going to get a result.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like do or die. You can't just get by memorizing stuff. And that's the problem, is our education system is preparing generations of people that literally can't do anything. So what other choice do they have but to go and get a job? So when you start studying the history of the education system, it's like, oh, makes sense. It's not designed to get everybody up to the highest levels. Now, from the perspective of the average teacher, they're just doing what they're taught to do. It's not like they are going along with some plan to dumb people down. Of course not. They're just doing what they can. And when you have 20 or 30 kids in a classroom, like, what are you supposed to do? Like you can't even get them to all sit still, and you have them like attacking each other and all kinds of crazy stuff going on. And then you're trying to teach them to read, right? And when you look at this, for example, this is the recommended curriculum for teaching the alphabet, right? ABC, right? I mean, my daughter's already mastered this. She's 1.5. Right. And my son Max.
And how do you know she's mastered it?
How do you know?
Yeah.
Because number one, within the technology, we can test and see whether someone knows something unconsciously. So without going into all the detail of how we do, because obviously we want to keep a little bit of curiosity there, right? So if people, the way that we have our company TechnoTutor structured is, our mission is a 2-part mission. One, it's to equalize education for all. But 2 is to provide meaningful work for many. And I think right now, especially, people are starting to feel that crunch of like, oh shit, my job, I'm screwed. Like I don't even have a job anymore. That restaurant I worked for is out of business. Now what? Right? And so I would really encourage you, if you are like, hey, how do I see TechnoTutor? How do I see it for myself and see that it really is doing what Cameron's saying? That you reach out either through our website, techno-tutor.com, or you go on the Facebook page, you can search TechnoTutor. Or you can send me a message, or you can send Mitch a message if you're seeing this on his page or something. Reach out to a distributor, because if you reach out to us, we'll connect you with somebody who's local to you, right? That way you can see it for yourself. It's all very specific, because if we just tried to, for example, implement this in a way where it just goes straight to the masses right away, you're not going to get the one-on-one support that's required for you to really understand how this approach works. The one thing that's missing is bringing the parent into the equation and having them take a level of responsibility for their child's education. A lot of times the child feels more bonded to their teacher than they do their parent. Or if they have a tutor, they respect the tutor more than the parent. And here you have the parent saying, you need to learn this information. It's important. Otherwise, I'm going to punish you and do all these things. And then they don't even remember, which is why they have the teacher and the tutor, right? Mm-hmm. So the child at a certain level starts to lose respect for the parent, because they're like, but you can't do this, right? And the thing is, when we test people's reading abilities, what we find is, and I'll mention this first before I say that, what all of this research shows right? And remember that thing I showed you with the Oxford thing? So this is, you know, because this is from the 90s, right? But that Oxford paper, I'll just pull it up real quick. I'll share that. Let me scroll down here. It says, check this out. There has not been a full presentation of evidence in a public forum about reading instruction that goes beyond the use of phonics. Okay? It's uncontroversial among reading scientists that coming to appreciate the relationships between letters and sounds is necessary and non-negotiable when learning to read in alphabetic writing systems, and that this is most successfully achieved through phonics instruction. I disagree with that last part only because that's the only thing that they know. They're only comparing whole language to phonics and saying that phonics is better. I agree with that, but it doesn't achieve the end result. And here's why. Yet reading scientists, teachers, and the public know that reading involves more than alphabetic skills. To become confident, successful readers, here we go, children need to learn to recognize words and compute their meanings rapidly without having to engage in translation back to sounds. Therefore, it is important to understand how children progress to this more advanced form of word recognition and how teaching practice can support this. Notice, not how we can guarantee it. And what you'll find is we're the only ones saying we can guarantee it. We know how to do it. Okay, but you have to see it for yourself, right? That's the only, you have to come halfway, okay? We know how to do it, but you have to see it for yourself, right? I was just looking at this app that was released online just recently because there's all these people wanting to know about homeschooling now, or at least their kids are not in school at the moment, so they're needing support at home. And it was like this new app, you know, created by this big company of, we're going to solve the problem with reading literacy and so, or global literacy. And when you look at the screenshots and the explanation of what it does, it's no different than anything else. And in fact, it goes against all the research. It's like, if you've actually read, but how many parents have read this stuff, this research? Right. How many teachers have read it? You know, when I talk to educators, they're just as surprised by everything I'm saying as anybody else. Because when you go to school to become a teacher, most of the focus of what you're taught is classroom management, not the research. For example, I have another book here. This was published in 2017, I believe. Yeah, 2017. It's called Language at the Speed of Sight, right, by Mark Seidenberg. He's a professor at University of Wisconsin-Madison, cognitive neuroscientist who has studied language, reading, and dyslexia for over 3 decades, right? And he makes this really cool, interesting point. He says, there's a profound disconnection between the science of reading and educational practice. Very little of what we've learned about reading as scientists has had any impact on what happens in schools because the cultures of science and education are so different. These cross-cultural differences, like many others, are difficult to bridge. So
wow.
What I'm saying is,
wow, that's
we know the
very
research,
concerning.
we've read the research, we've processed it, and we've done something about it. We've done the thing that we're saying you would be able to do if you could process information. And right here in 2017, they're saying this hasn't happened in the education system. But if you think about it, the education system is a huge system. And it's more about classroom management. This is what I was alluding to earlier, is the teachers, when they go to school, they don't learn this stuff. They learn how to manage a classroom. And so most of the educational technology that exists, that everyone gets all hyped up about, is how teachers can manage homework lessons and you know, what student needs what feedback, and you know, online video lessons and things like that. It's not fundamentally addressing the ability of a student or a child to process information. So even that new app that I was referring to, it doesn't do it either. It's like, and when you look at it, you're like, no adult would read it, or no adult would use this. It's not for adults, it's for children, which there's this assumption that you basically stop learning to read when you hit 3rd grade. There's this axiom. You can look it up, type it into your Google or whatever. The educators almost say this, almost like with a point of pride, like they have some information that no one else has. And they say, up to 3rd grade, you're learning to read. But after 3rd grade, you're reading to learn. Now think about how that reflects in your own experience in education. It's pretty obviously true. You're focused on getting word lists and memorizing things and spelling and stuff like that up to about 3rd grade. And after that, they're giving you books to read and textbooks and stuff like that. Generally don't have a lot of textbooks prior to 3rd grade. So what that means is the focus of education shifts from teaching how to read to now you're okay, you know how to read, so here's just the books and now you got to read. So imagine if it was possible that you could have an underlying ability to read that's more advanced than another child, and it had nothing to do with school. And so by the time you're getting more and more advanced textbooks, you're able to keep up where they're not able to. And what they also showed with the research is that it didn't matter in school what method you were taught to read. The students who were effective readers became effective readers regardless. And it had to do more with their foundation and things that happened at home before they even could recognize the alphabet. There was things going on in the home that's different, and it really comes down to how much, what's the income of the parents. And there was the 30 million word gap study, which showed between low income and upper income families, there's a gap of 30 million words that a child hears just in the first 4 years of their life. And so that's like practicing something 30 million more times by someone else by the time you're 4 years old, right? And not only that, in the low-income families or in low-income homes, a child would, for every one positive statement that they would hear 2 negative statements. And in the upper-income families, it was 8 positives to 1 negative. So you look at, and then what do you think that the parents are talking about in the upper-income families? What kind of things are the kids picking up on? Like when I'm around my kids, I'll be talking to my wife, and then randomly Max will ask, what do you mean, Dad? Why did you say that? Like he's hearing us talking about stuff that doesn't involve him. So what is Bill Gates' family talking about when he's 7 years old? And when you listen to his interviews, he says, we would sit around the dinner table every night and my dad would talk about his legal cases, and we would discuss it and we would share our ideas about things. So that's how we speak to our children. It's like we speak to them about things that is beyond their level of understanding, apparently, what most people would think. Because you're assuming that the children, when you're 3 years old, you know certain things. And when you're 5 years old, you know certain things. No, you don't know anything more than what's been put into you. It's like a computer. And they say, let's just say garbage in, garbage out. If you put in the right input, you're going to get the right output, right? And that's really what the crux of the education system is that by the time the child gets to school, their basic foundation has already been set. And so there's very little of what's occurring in school that is increasing the child's ability. At the very least, all it does is produce a situation where it looks like most children can read, when really the best that they can do is sound out the words. And just think about it, like that thing I showed you from Oxford, right? It says the key is word recognition, automatic. Yes, does phonics give you the ability to associate sounds of letters to the letters and so forth? It doesn't really give you that ability. Phonics is nothing more, nothing less than just the awareness and discussion of the fact that letters and sounds correspond in many cases. It's in itself not some special technology. It's just an awareness that that's the case, right? But just using phonics alone, there's a lot of misunderstanding, and it never gets to a point where you have automatic recognition in itself. Phonics, and that's even what's interesting about it is, even though in many cases this book argues that phonics is better than whole language theory, which it is, it also says it's a means to an end, and we have to look beyond that. This was the 90s, and that paper from Oxford that I was showing you, 2018, is still saying, hey guys, we think one of the reasons why people don't implement phonics by and large in schools and so forth is because we're not talking about what happens after that. So it's kind of like, what's the point? Going back to something I said in the very beginning of our talk today, I said we can come back to it, which is, why is whole language theory taught? So what whole language theory is the idea that we're not going to systematically teach children that this letter sounds like this. And then, when you're reading a word, you have a strategy of how to figure out, based on the sounds of the letters, what the word might be. We're not going to do that. We're just going to teach you ways of guessing what the word might be by putting that word near a picture. I'll give you an example real quick, okay? I have a whiteboard over here. Yeah, I'll show you an example. Okay, so hopefully you can see what I'm writing here, okay? So let's say you got this picture. Okay, you can see that thing a little bit, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, can you see what it says there?
Yes, I see the cat.
Okay. So what whole language theory is, now imagine you're a 5-year-old and you don't even know those words. Maybe you know some of them. Now, if you know the alphabet at that point, you would know that's I, right? But if you're looking at this picture I drew, I'm trying to draw this guy, this person, and these dots kind of represent that he's looking at a cat maybe. I'm trying to give you clues as to what's going on. And so let's assume for a moment the only word you don't know or you can't pronounce is this word cat. And so you just don't know that word. You don't know that spelling is the word cat. So you're looking at this and a child might say, I see and they look at this picture like dog, right? No, not a dog, you dummy, right? You know, some kid might laugh at him, right? And one kid thinks that I refers to the cat. So he says, I see the person, man. And they're like, what? What do you think that's a person, you idiot? You see what I mean? Like how now all this self-esteem stuff comes in. You know how kids like will bully each other in school and so forth. But the kid who already can read it goes, duh, it says cat, like it's obvious. They're not even looking at the picture. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So why would we take this approach? Why is it that the schools have more adopted this approach rather than phonics? Although when I was in school, we also learned phonics, okay? But you know, I was born in 1984, right? So nowadays, it's less phonics, okay? But what's going on here is that the system knows that most children have a limited vocabulary, meaning, now I know this might be an extreme case, but imagine the child who grows up in the inner city and only watches, you know, whatever the parents are watching on TV. I'm just giving an example, right? And they live in an apartment complex and they never see a cat. And they just don't talk about cats that much. So in the first 4 years of their life, they never really heard the word cat. Okay, and I mean, that's an extreme example, but you can imagine some situations where there's words they never heard. Like, here's an example, compound interest. Okay, never heard that word, all right? So by the time they get to high school and they're trying to do problems about compound interest, they're not even processing that because they didn't learn it. Their brain didn't make those neural pathways in that phase that we call the natural learning ability phase in those first 7 years, and they were just absorbing information automatically. There's also a process called neural pruning that takes place, where connections that are not used start to fall away in the brain. And so the brain is like a statistical analysis machine. It's listening for all these sounds and it's keeping the connections that are important because it keeps hearing them, right? There's a period, I don't know the exact numbers, I don't remember it, but it's like up to 8 months. I'm just giving you a random number. Up to 8 months, children can distinguish between certain phonetic sounds in Chinese that after that point they can. Okay, I'm just giving you, I don't know if it's 8 months, whatever the month is, because that's when the neural pruning for those particular pathways start to go away, right? So you can recognize all those sounds up until a point you don't need it anymore. If you grew up in a Chinese household, you would have heard those sounds, your brain would have kept those pathways, right? So the pathways for this sound are not built for the sound cat. So when the child sees this, even if for some reason someone said cat, or think about this, they don't even have that in their sound, you know, library as a possible sound that this word could be. So they're not really sure what sound this word could be. So, but they're giving the children strategies because you can more safely make the assumption that, and let me put this, why is that evidence as to why they wouldn't teach phonics? Because the whole approach of phonics is you sounding the word out until it sounds like a word you know already. But if you never heard the word cat, are you ever going to figure out oh, that's that word cat that I know. It's not in your mental library for it to be a connection to me. Okay, so I'll give you an example of phonics in a moment. So in the 60s and so forth, this became more popular through the progressive movement in education, right? And so this kind of invaded the schools, but you can see this method is employing the approach of using context clues, which the research found out very quickly. The researchers found out is what makes poor readers. And we kept using this method. And just recently, over the last 10 years, they've removed all of the vocabulary from the SATs that you would have to know without being able to figure it out through context. So it seems like children are doing just as well on the SAT, but when I took the SAT, I don't know about you, but I think I'm like 10 years older than you. When I took the SAT, there was like, you had to know this word means, and here's some multiple choice. Or they would have analogies. This word to this word, rowing to a boat is flying, or, driving to a blank. But the words were not like just commonly used words, right? Now, I took Latin in school, And so my vocabulary from that perspective was a lot higher. I was a National Merit Scholar. I got a perfect score on the verbal aspect of the SAT. But I had a lot of advantages in that from that perspective. Now, fast forward to today, they've taken all that stuff out. Even though vocabulary, knowing the meanings of words, is the highest predictor of success later in life. Income, relationship success, a whole number of factors, right? Just your vocabulary. Being able to recognize and know the meanings of words automatically. That research was done by Johnson O'Connor. But you can see with the whole language theory, we can use this approach for anybody. It's like a one size fits all in a sense that you don't really have to know anything. You don't even have to be good at memorizing, because phonics, if I'm going to teach you the sound letter correspondence of each letter, you better be good at memorizing. If you're learning it now, not already. Like if you come into school with that knowledge already, there's nothing to memorize with phonics. You see? But if you're now relying on your ability to memorize, and you're basically at the tail end of your natural learning ability phase, which the psychologists all recognize, right? In fact, the Handbook of Reading Research that I was telling you about, in there, it says that the only way that they really know, this is in the 80s, to teach children new vocabulary, which is the number one predictor of being able to read, knowing the words. It says it in the freaking research. But the problem is, they said that the only way that they know in the schools to teach children new words is by giving them books with words that they don't know, so outside their vocabulary. Mm-hmm. But the best time to absorb new words automatically to that point where you just know it is when the child is before they're literate, is when they're pre-literate, when they're 3, 4, 5, or 1 through 5. Mm-hmm. But before they get to school. So in other words, it's saying that natural learning ability phase window is the best time to build the child's vocabulary. But by the time they get to school, the only way we know to give them the vocabulary is through new books, but they can't read the books. And the best time to absorb the information would have been when they couldn't read the books. You see the problem?
Yeah.
So what we're saying with technotutors, what if you could just give your child the vocabulary and structure their vocabulary in a way where when they start reading later on, they already know the words. Mm-hmm. That's the child who's going to find that book on quantum mechanics interesting.
Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And it opens up whole new worlds to them.
Exactly, right? Because now they're like exploring things they wouldn't have explored otherwise, right? Yeah. Okay, so this is whole language theory. This is just the basic idea, okay? Mm-hmm. Now let me share something with you on my screen here. Okay. All right, here's that app I was telling you about. Look, we love water. Can you see that?
Yeah.
And there's the kid, and there's is that a dog or a pig? It's blue. I've never seen a blue dog before, so I'm not really sure it's an alien. Right? Are they loving the water, or is that kid upset about it? I can't really tell. The dog seems neutral. You see what I'm saying? Like, there's so much room for interpretation here. Now let's go over here. Matt is a rat. Okay. Well, is that a rat? It looks more like a mole rat.
What? Okay. Yeah.
It's a mouse or a rat maybe. But again, do you see the problem? It's exactly this approach I'm showing you over here on the board. Right? It's association. It's trying to get them to start, through spaced repetition, associate those letters R-A-T with the picture of the rat. But mm-hmm. That doesn't look like a rat. What I'm saying is, I know it's a cartoon version, but you ever seen a real rat?
Yeah.
Okay, that's not what they look like. A real rat looks like a rat. That mm-hmm. looks like some cartoon. Mm-hmm. And they did this study. You'll have to look up the name of it. It's called it was like the blue cow or the purple cow or red cow or something like that. There was this popular. It's like a dairy product or a cheese or something like that in Germany, I think it was, or somewhere in Europe, where it's like a cow and then it's like a certain color, like red or blue or purple or something like that. And they were testing children later on, asking them what color is a cow. And it was like this huge percentage of them was like red. They actually thought cows were red because that was their only exposure to cows. Was that picture with the word cow. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So this is, and there's other research you can go down this rabbit hole that shows when you put words and pictures together and that's when you're forming the neural pathway, it actually creates a minor form of brain damage, especially if someone's prone to dyslexia and so forth, right? So there's all kinds of problems with that approach. Now I'll show you something even more fascinating. Okay. Because it might seem like up to this point, I'm saying, well, you got to go with phonics. Phonics is the way, right? But phonics has its own set of problems. And I was already pointed out from the Oxford thing, that paper we were looking at, Ending the Reading Wars. They're saying right there, what goes beyond that, right? And in Marilyn Yeager Adams' book, Beginning to Read, she says, it's a means to an end. You can't stop with phonics. And so what we found in the research and our own testing and so forth is that phonics, when you're taught through phonics, at best, it gets you up to like a 3rd grade reading level, right? For the average person. And so, and how do we know? Because we can test a room of people and they're all fall within a 3rd grade reading ability or lower. And the people who are slightly above that, they're doctors, they're lawyers, they tend to have some higher level of education, but it wasn't their education that gave them that vocabulary. The reason why they're in that higher position is because they already had a higher processing ability. You see, it's the other way around. Mm-hmm. So we tend to look at the education system and see, like, look at the outliers and be like, see, look what we produced. It's like, that was only less than 1%. That's not what you're producing. You know what I mean? Like, if you hired me to come over and paint your house and I did a really shitty job on 9 of the 10 rooms, and then the 10th room, I'm like, see, that's how I paint, man. I don't know what you're talking about. The other ones were just, you're like, no, dude, that's not how you paint. It's the other 9. That's how you paint, okay? You got lucky on number 10. You see what I mean? So we got to look at what is the education system actually producing, all right? Mm-hmm. So here's probably how you were taught to read to a large degree. Myself, many people will relate to this, right? Is you were taught with phonics, right? And that's where you have like the word cat. I'll try to write it big, right? I don't know if, can you see it?
It's the C didn't.
Yeah, let me try that again. It's a little better.
Yeah.
I don't know why it's diagonal, but whatever. All right, so I'll just tilt my
computer. The advanced training.
with phonics, what we do is we would teach the child to memorize the sound of the letters. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we have like, what does the letter C sound like? Right, K, right? Mm-hmm. But it doesn't always, because if you look at the word ice, right, or the word receive or scientist, for example, it doesn't always sound like that.
Yeah.
So already right off the bat, the more you know as possibilities for how the letter C can sound, the less certain you are as to how you should proceed. Mm-hmm. Okay. But so let's just say you didn't know, you just guessed it was K because that's the only one you knew. And then you have A and you have T, right? But even A we know can sound like other things, right? In other words, it can have a slightly different sound to it, right? But let's just say we got it right, K-A-T, and we speed that up, K-A-T, 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 K. You get it? It's a K-A-T, right? You see what I mean? And like, that's the kid there. Everyone's laughing. They're like, this idiot over here, K-A-T, what the hell's a K-A-T, right? Mm. And somebody who already knows, they're like, no, I know it's cat. It's K-A-T. That sounds kind of like cat, right? But mm-hmm. That's not natural at all. It's a totally artificial thing. And the bigger problem with it is, actually, put it back up there. The bigger problem with it is if I were to look at the word cat, like if you do a lot of like online stuff and recording of things and sound and video. When you look at a sound wave, it looks like this. Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of like that, right? Mm-hmm. Or for example, I have that Seidenberg book over here where I was talking about the language at the speed of sight. I'll see if you can see that.
Yeah.
Right? That's the sound wave for the word bat. So very similar to cat. All right? Okay, very similar. But he makes this point, if you look at that wave, it's like, where does the C start and the A start and the T start? Maybe the C is the first one, but where's the other ones? Right? And so guessing. The reality is the word bat, when you say it, is one sound. Whereas ba-ata is like 3 different sounds. And so speeding it up never becomes bat. It's just bata, ba-ata, ba-ata. Mm-hmm. You see what I mean? It's never actually bat. So by teaching phonics, if you already knew the word bat, consciously you can go, oh, ba-ata, bat. Oh, that's like bat. Okay. So if you already have that word in your like mental library, then mm-hmm. It can get you there. And then the hope is that through spaced repetition, you'll start to remember when you see bat, it'll start to click. Mm-hmm. But the problem is when you test people who've learned through phonics on many of the words that they think they know, and even individual letters in many cases, you can find that they're not efficient in processing. And so, in other words, it's like their brain is using a fraction of an amount of energy more than it should. And so over time, as you read, even simple things like this starts to use up your energy reserves. And like Marilyn Yeager Adams says, you don't have the cognitive energy to really process everything. So it starts to slow down. And many people have experienced when they're reading, they just start to get this tiredness, this heaviness.
Yeah.
They start to fall asleep, right? Why do you think Adderall and Ritalin and so forth are such popular drugs in education? Because it forces you to like focus, right? And it's funny because if you take those drugs, right? I was prescribed those when I was in college. I went to a psychiatrist, told him, here's my issue. I couldn't focus in school. He was like, that same day, here you go. Bam. Now I had this Adderall, right? Hey, it really does help you focus. And you know what? My kitchen got really clean that day that I took it that first time. But I didn't get any homework done. Okay? It's like, and they've done these studies. Here, I got some for you. Oh, you'll love this. Man, I wasn't planning on talking about this. I'm glad I remembered. Let me see what we got here.
And I remember in college, it was really popular for people to take it to like study for finals.
Yeah.
And it's like people had that feeling because some people take it and it's like, ooh, the rush, like I'm being productive. So people it's just like this nasty cycle of like, I'm being so productive. It must be good because I feel good. It's like screwing yourself up because then you can't even focus without it.
Well, that's a great point that you make. And that's what I realized as to why after about a week, I stopped taking it. Because I was like, if I become dependent upon this thing, I'll never develop my own ability to focus. And you know what? I realized I'm screwed. So sometimes you have to be honest with yourself about what's the actual situation. Just like we're talking about right now, I really hope people realize our children, if we don't change something, we don't do something differently, they're screwed. We need to be honest about that. Otherwise, we're not going to do what's necessary to change it. And then, this whole thing that's going on right now with the COVID-19 and everything's shut down, people don't know what to do. And this is like a preview from my perspective as what life would be like. What life would be like when full automation hits, where there are no more jobs to go back to. And there's many people I think right now that as the longer this shutdown drags on with this virus thing, are going to feel that right away. Like they don't have a job. I was just the other day we were driving around, or I was going to do, I forget what it was I was doing, but I saw a restaurant and it had a big banner. And I don't know how long it's been there, but probably just recently in the last few weeks. And it said, just opened. Wouldn't that suck to be that restaurant right now? Like that person who got all their life savings, all their enthusiasm, passion, everything. They opened it. A week later, the government shuts down all the restaurants. They're screwed. They're totally screwed. Right? And I know this one guy, he was a chemical engineer at DuPont, quit his job because he couldn't get promoted because he was being paid more already than most of his bosses. So he couldn't get promotion and couldn't get a job somewhere else because same reason, they would have to pay him a lot less. So for some reason he got paid way too much at DuPont. And he quit the whole thing to open up a restaurant. Right? And it was like a burger restaurant. And it was actually a pretty good place. I mean, I don't know what's going on with it right now. I'm sure they're totally screwed, right? But he put it all on the line. So I'm sure I'll be talking to him pretty soon. But I wanted to show you this. Here we go. Now, this article looks like it's sensational, okay? Wait. Here it is. Harvard researchers say certain ADHD medications may increase risk of psychosis. CNBC, right? Researchers studied 13 to 25-year-olds. They defined psychosis as hallucinations, Although the risk is low, data comes at a time when prescription rates and diagnoses of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder are on the rise. a significant increase in the prevalence of diagnosed ADHD. Okay. Researchers analyzed 221,000 patients that was over a few decade. 1 out of every 486 taking amphetamines later required treatment for psychosis. 1 out of every 1,046 on methylphenidate. That's like Ritalin. Amphetamines would be like Adderall, right? And let me just stop this share.
Wow.
Because I don't know how to easily switch it over. I have the article that's based off the New England Journal of Medicine, but I want to show you. Wait, which one is it? Oh wait, no, that's not the one.
It's like Band-Aids everywhere. We're like trying to put Band-Aids on it, but it's like the Band-Aids are like poisonous. There's a consequence to putting the Band-Aid on the wound. And so it's like, we're not only not even addressing the root, we're putting a Band-Aid on it, but it's like that Band-Aid's actually making it worse.
And okay, here's the other one I want to show. I just found it.
It's ridiculous.
Here we go. Comparison of intranasal methamphetamine and D-amphetamine self-administration by humans. Methamphetamine is, as you know, crystal meth, right? Street drug. D-amphetamine, that's just one of the isomers of amphetamine, which is Adderall, right? And they're extremely closely related chemically. And what they found in this study was they tested people, by the way, who were street users of meth. So these aren't just like random people. Columbia University, see it, right? Okay. The meth users couldn't tell the difference between the meth and the Adderall.
Right.
Not only that, because it was double blind, the doctors couldn't tell which ones had been given the meth and which ones had been given the Adderall.
Wow.
Okay, and I know families where their children from second grade, they've been taking this stuff, right? And I have a video or an audio up on my YouTube channel talking about an experience I had with a student where one of the reasons why their parents kind of got interested in Technotutor was when I found out that the kid was having these migraines, and he told me it was because of his ADHD medication, and I pointed it out to the mom. And so that's what led us into a conversation about their education and so forth. They ended up eventually getting Technotutor, right? And I can't make any claims that it can treat your ADHD or something like that, but that's not what we're here to do. We're here to develop effective information processing and reading ability. And what I found in my own experience is that when I didn't have the ability to understand something easily, it was difficult. I had trouble focusing. When I'm really absorbed into something, I don't have any trouble focusing. I would always ask my students that I would work with, because they'd be like, oh yeah, my doctor told me I had this problem. I can't focus. I have ADHD. I'm like, let me ask you a question. Do you ever have problems focusing on video games? They're like, oh, no, I can play that for hours. I'm like, okay. You see what I mean? Because like that's in their vocabulary. That's a part of what they understand. And we talked about the deeper levels of what does vocabulary really mean in our Red Pill of Education. So I'm going to assume people can watch that and get that context. Okay, so I want to quickly go back to this phonics thing, right? So I like to say this is the nail in the coffin, so to speak. If you really get this, then it's like, okay, we can just put the whole phonics debate to rest. What am I trying to do here? Okay. All right. Here we go. Okay. GHOTI. I'm going to put the camera up so someone can see it, right?
Mm-hmm. I'll put you on speaker view so people can just see the full screen.
Ah, okay, cool. All right. There we go. All right. It's hard for me to see. Oh, actually, let me make mine bigger so I can see what you see. Perfect. Now, it's not actually backwards when you guys are looking at it, right?
No, it's straight on.
Because I see like their mirrored view. Okay, cool. So what would you say the average person would say how you say that word?
Goatee.
Goatee or gaudy, right? Something like that. Probably goatee maybe because of the, like we're thinking like ghost because of the H, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's like if you've never seen this word, and I've done this with many people, like probably at least 100 people by now, just in person asking him this point. Everyone says either Goaty or Gotti. And I say, how did you know? How did you know that was pronounced Goaty? Do you know this word? They're like, no, I've never seen that word before. But I'm like, how did you know how it was pronounced? And see, that's because of phonics, right? And so anybody looking at it is going, yeah, see, I know it's Goaty. Nice, I got it. And I'll tell you, no, the way you pronounce this word is fish, okay? And I don't mean it's a foreign language word that means fish. I mean, that's how you say this word. That's how you phonetically pronounce it, fish, okay? So I'll show you using phonics and the rules of phonics that you can pronounce this fish, just like that, okay? So for example, what's this word?
Enough.
Right? So this sounds like what?
F.
Like an F, right? So that's F. And then you have the word.
Yeah, women.
And women, right? So this O becomes a I, right? And then finally, if you take the TI out of the word nation,
yeah,
the TI becomes SH. So this could be pronounced fish. So in other words, the more clever you are, the more you know, the less certain you are about how that word should be pronounced. You know, and it's really cool. I've seen really cool videos of people doing like SAT questions where or IQ tests, and they're like really smart people, and they'll take the IQ question, and it'll be like, you know, complete the pattern, and they'll come up with like this really complex like mathematical formula that makes the pattern something you totally couldn't predict, but that generates the first few sets of the sequence, right? Like you can take any four numbers or or any set of numbers you want, and I can generate a polynomial that'll give you those first four numbers, but the next number doesn't seem to fit the pattern you're thinking it is. So in other words, if you're really good at seeing patterns most people can't see, and when I say most people, I mean even the smart people, then you actually come across looking stupid, because people are like, what are you talking about? It's that. And they actually had to adjust the SAT many years ago because they had questions like that where it was like sequence, or, you know, like what's the next number in the sequence? And some guy went and proved that all his answers that they said were wrong were correct because he generated equations that produced those numbers and the ones he put. So they had to fundamentally change the SAT again. So every time, so in other words, they're not really testing you for how smart you are. They're testing you how much you fit into the pattern, right? And so even with this example I gave there, you can see that the smarter you are, you know, and like, let me put it this way. Do teachers like the really smart kids, the really clever ones?
No, not usually.
You know what I mean? Like, I was that kid who was always talking in class and goofing around because I understood what they were saying already, you know? And so they didn't like me. You know, I was the one having to walk in circles during recess, right? Just because I like talking and stuff, right? And it was boring. So if you're really smart, they don't like that. They like the ones who are just smart enough that they can remember what the teacher said, but don't question it, right? And so there's so much more that goes on in school that's not actual learning. That's really just a form of indoctrination. And I mentioned him last time. I don't think I have the book. I think I showed it last time, but John Taylor Gatto's stuff is really great for that, from that perspective, to learn more about the education system. But can you see with the phonics thing, it doesn't produce automatic word recognition. It's not even designed to do that. Like when you just look at it from that perspective, you're like, okay, at best, it's going to give you the ability to sound things out. But I just gave you an example where it failed. Because who decides that that word is fish or goatee, right? So there's plenty of examples in English where a word is not based on, it doesn't sound like its phonetic spelling anyways, right? So you couldn't even use phonics. And that's what they call sight words. So there's words, not all sight words are this way, but many words are words that you just have to know what they are, or you can't sound it out. And so the problem is they're like going back in this debate, should we do sight words? Should we do phonics and so forth? But they're all based on memorization, association, context, all these different things, which are really just coping mechanisms. And what they've shown is the children who come in with a proper foundation, which they got from their parents, because they either had a genetic ability to learn very rapidly, or or also their parents were high level, you know, high income earners, things like that, where they got a lot of that vocabulary, at least in a spoken sense, from a very young age. So they had a distinct advantage when they go into the school system, right? And so these are the main issues that we're seeing within how our children are learning to read. Now, I would encourage anybody watching this to go, if you're not on my channel seeing this, to go to my YouTube channel. My username is Cameron V. Cope. My middle name is Vaughn V, kind of like the word Victor, but it's Vaughn with a V. Cameron V. Cope. If you go to my YouTube channel, you'll see, along with this video, it will be in a playlist. You'll see another playlist called something to do with the kids of the Technotutor co-founder, something like that. That playlist has videos of my children, Max and Seneca. And you'll see that Max can read at a very advanced level for his age, and we're not teaching him phonics, and we're not teaching him whole language theory. And yet, he's already realizing certain phonetic things. So what you'll notice is when you integrate vocabulary effectively, phonics makes sense, but you're not relying on it. So it's not limiting you when it breaks down. It's just like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess that word does make sense phonetically. But you're not confused when something doesn't, because you know the word. And what's cool with Max's ability is you can take the words out of context. So it's not like he can read these words just when they're in this book with the puppy picture, and then he sees the word puppy. You take the word puppy randomly, like when he wakes up in the morning and he's just opening his eyes up and you show him the word puppy, he can read it. So you can like test and see, okay, this person knows this. They're not just guessing. Plus we have in the technology a way to tell for sure whether a person knows something, whether it's physically integrated, as we say, or not, or whether it's just memorized. You can tell very easily using the technology. So it is good at both assessing and then also from the learning perspective as well. It works in so many different ways. But when you see what we're doing with Max and my daughter Seneca, their abilities, Max is 3.5, not even 3.5 yet. And he can already read at what you would consider a second grade level. And the reason why I say second grade is because, first of all, he has the tracking ability that the school system says is important, which is the ability to read left to right and to know that that's a thing you should do. But his vocabulary, the kinds of words he can read, they're actually in many cases above a second grade level. It's hard to put a level on it because, he can read the word diminished just as easily as he can read the word, tree or car, because we put it into Technotutor. And what you'll see is if it's a word he doesn't know it. But we don't teach him coping mechanisms. We just take that word and build it in. And so he's now 3.5. And actually, I'd have to ask Katie because I don't know the exact number of words that he can read. But at 3.5, he can read more effectively than most 6, 7, 8, even 9-year-olds, right? Because of the technology that we're using with him. And we're not doing anything else. So if you go and watch those videos that we have of him, you'll see, wow, he can actually demonstrate this ability with comprehension. People say, well, how do you know he's comprehending? Well, when you meet him, you'll see. When you talk to him, he understands what you're saying. So if he's using the words that he's reading, the same words that you're using when you're speaking to him, he can comprehend it. And this is the problem is, why is there even a debate if a child reads a book, whether they're comprehending it or not? Are they able to understand it and explain it and have a conversation about it or not? It's very difficult to test that in a classroom because of the limitations of time and the fact that it's all standardized. So you can only ask them very specific questions based on memory recall. You can't just have a conversation and be like, wow, this person understands. Like, could you have a conversation with Bill Gates and be like, wow, this guy comprehends what I'm saying? You don't need a written test to do that. And yet we can also do the written testing and all that stuff too. But what I'm saying is so often the school system limits actual assessment ability because they have to make it standardized. They have to put it into statistics. They have to put it on a spreadsheet. So you lose that qualitative aspect of, wow, this child understands something, right? So when you speak with Max, it becomes so apparent if you have him read something and then you ask him, what does that mean? He'll start explaining to you, right? But we can also do the normal, academic sort of testing and stuff as well. But of course, many of that, it doesn't make sense to anybody. They want to see like him reading or whatever the case may be. And so we have lots of videos of that. And right now what he's doing is he's learning how to play the piano, and he just got, those recorders that we learned to play in school, right? He got one of those in the mail just recently. So now he's learning how to play that. And he's having a lot of fun with that. But it's cool because he can read like chord charts, like A minor seventh and stuff like that. Like he can read it and read the words, and he can see the keys on the piano, so we can distinguish between different chords and notes and all kinds of stuff. And we have videos of Seneca, for example, who's just now 1.5, where we have the piano labeled with the letters of the keys, and we're saying, where's the A? And she can find the A because she can read the letters, right? So she at 1.5 is already at the automatic word recognition level that they're trying to get a kindergartner to. And most children by the end of kindergarten have memorized the alphabet, and when they can stare at it and think about it, and they don't even test them on the whole alphabet, generally speaking, because of the time constraints and so forth, they've memorized it. But with TechnoTutor, you can see whether the person knows it unconsciously or not. So that way we can demonstrate her abilities, but we can also prove that she recognizes it automatically. So that's why this is a total game changer for education, because it incorporates all the research. What the research says is the end result. It doesn't cut any corners. It goes directly to that 100% of the time. And we have, you can see it for yourself. So this is, let me put a caveat. This is not for everybody. Why do I say that? Not because I don't think it works for everybody, but because not everybody's going to want to take right now the responsibility required to make sure that their children have this. And if in a few minutes a day, you can take your child, whether they're 4 years old or 5 years old or 6 years old, or whether they're a teenager, and you can rebuild their vocabulary in a few minutes a day to the point where they can now understand what they're learning in school or read books outside of school and so forth and understand and apply them. That's who this is for. Somebody who wants their child to make sure that they're not missing out because they were expecting a system that clearly cannot produce the result that the system says it's trying to produce or that it needs to produce. They want to take that responsibility for themselves. So hopefully I'm giving people enough to chew on and to look at and be like, okay, there's definitely some reasons to question what my teacher is saying is the right way to do it. And I've had people get TechnoTutor, and then because it was so quick, the result, they took their kids out of a $20,000 a year private school because the school started arguing with them that they shouldn't be doing whatever they're doing at home because it's confused, the kids confusing the other students because they're teaching them, you just sound out the words. But and the letters, and they're not even teaching the children the names of the letters. That's the Montessori approach. Yeah.
What?
So like, only teaching the sounds, right? But but how do you teach the child the sound of the word G in the word enough?
Right.
You can't. And what about the O and the U?
Mm-hmm.
What, is it where's the O? So I thought the O always sounded like O. So you're literally dumbing the child down, meaning you're filling their head up with information that's not going to serve them in the long run. That's what I mean by dumbing down. And so parents will spend $20,000 a year on school for their 5-year-old. They get TechnoTutor, and then within a week they've already learned everything that school is trying to teach them for the entire year. Mm-hmm. And they're like, well, what's the point, right? And we've had parents. We have a really great testimonial from Carlos it's on my YouTube channel. And he took his 2 children, 3 and 4, and they've already mastered the alphabet. The 4-year-old's now reading words. And they only spoke Spanish at home up until that point. And they're reading in English, right? And they don't go to school. And so a 3 and a 4-year-old Hispanic family who only speaks Spanish at home are now, if they were in school, would both be the smartest kids in the kindergarten class at the end of the year. Just because they use this technology for a few minutes out of the day, right? So we can produce what the school system wants to do but can't for the children. And then when you bring in for the adults, that's why I'd really recommend for the adults to realize this is how you've been taught how to read. And this is why now when the system is collapsing, so many people are like frantic and panicking and like don't know what to do because all they can do is respond emotionally. They can't process any of the information. They can't read actually what the doctors are saying and so forth. They can only respond emotionally, and they don't know what to do because if their job's not there when they go back out when this is over, they're screwed. They don't, like, think about it. This is the perfect opportunity to become an entrepreneur, is it not? But how many people can now take all those entrepreneur books that you've been reading and actually start applying them right now in real time when it matters? And this is what we've been saying for years now with TechnoTutor is your ability to read and process information and learn needs to be such that when you can't predict what kind of jobs are going to be available, you can respond immediately. This is what we've been saying now since we started the company in 2013. our focus has been on talking about automation. And I feel like Andrew Yang, when he said, man, maybe I should have been talking about pandemics instead of automation, right? But of course, no one really predicted that this would be the thing that would shut everything down, because there's been pandemics before, maybe not at this level in terms of how it's been declared and so forth, but there's been epidemics really from that perspective, swine flu, SARS, Ebola, these kind of things, but it's never shut down the economy to the degree that it has now. But this is really just a preview for what's going to happen when full automation hits. We might as well get ready for it now. And as I just showed you, last year in November, they were saying our children can't read. The school system is, so what are they going to do? Okay, guys, listen, right now as adults, we're feeling the crunch. What are our children going to do in 15 to 18 years when they're now out there in the job force and there aren't even any jobs? Because not only are these pandemics happening, but everything's automated. You know, and look at the arguments that they're making right now. I just reading one by Gordon Brown. I'm not going to pull it up. You can look for it online. It was in The Guardian, I think, today. He was just saying, Gordon Brown, former Prime Minister of UK, this is going to move everyone to being okay with educating their kids at home, working from home, etc. Now you're working from home. Okay. So the company that you work for says, well, we don't need people to come into the office. How long is it going to be before they realize they could just automate you? Right? And if you have a restaurant or a small business, you're totally screwed. So this is a great time for the corporations to consolidate their control over industries and so forth. But it's also a huge opportunity for everybody being displaced who can hear what I'm saying to be like, man, I need to re-educate myself. I need to take my children's education into my own hands. And here's a tool that can do it. Here's somebody who's doing it, right? And then you have Mitch who's saying, I'm using this technology. It's allowed me. I mean, you've already made that your testimony. You've written it. You've made that video and so forth, where you've shown how you've gone from reading about how to make money to applying it, and suddenly, like, bam, now you're really doing the thing that you've been reading about doing. And I know that your story and what you do can help so many young entrepreneurs, especially because I see all these young people out there that are like, I'm a digital marketer and all this stuff, but they're just talking about it. And they're afraid to actually talk to people and so forth. They don't know how to persuade or communicate or anything, you know? And so exactly what we're saying is you got screwed over by the education system. TechnoTutor is education for the 21st century and beyond. Now you can take it back into your own hands, right? So I don't know, what else do you see as relevant? Because you know me, Mitch, you know what I kind of generally know, but I wanted to give everybody sort of a taste as to, okay, now you see the system is collapsing. Let's look at education system and how it's doing and what it's preparing everybody for. It's an outdated system. It's based on the 1800s. Just like our work system in terms of careers and so forth is based on an outdated system. It's clearly not holding up in a pandemic. So don't put faith in the education system. You have to take responsibility into your own hands. I hope everyone really gets that from what I'm saying, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the first time I heard this message, when I met you and met Max, met your wife Katie, and just, it was like I was in denial that, holy shit, I'm the kind of person who would still read like 50, 60 books a year. And I wasn't processing it. And I had to come to grips with the fact that, okay, I have to face reality, which is I did not properly know how to actually read. and I was like in denial for a little bit, but like I'm very teachable, and I realized there's a lot I don't know because I want to be very successful in this world. But I clearly wasn't successful because the stuff inside me, the programming, was not there. If it was, I would already be successful.
Right.
And just the amount of emotional instability I had felt too when I had first met you and Avery and Kian and some of the other guys, and I was like, I could pick up on that within you guys, that you were very clear and very certain in what you were doing. Yeah. I was like, I want that. And then, then they just exposed me to this. We did the reading assessment, and I found for myself just how poorly I was reading. I'm like, and comprehend. I definitely wasn't comprehending 100%. That's right. for dang sure. I was comprehending like 60 to 70%.
Right.
So, and then Kian put it in a great way. He said, so how much time you spend every day reading? I was like, well, probably an hour. Is that okay? How much is your time worth to you? Wouldn't it be good to know that you could actually just, do a little work on the front end, and then you actually process 100% of it? and actually apply it, like, are you serious or are you not? And that was when I had to decide, like, yes, I'm serious about this. If you show me the way, because I'm overwhelmed, but if you can show me the way and walk me through it, I want to see it. And they're like, of course, that's what we do. So for anyone in that position too, is like, you may be in kind of denial, or you may be like, I still don't need this. It's not bad enough yet. We'll be here.
Well, and it's kind of like, how much pain do you have to go through really before you were like, okay, I need to do something here, right? And especially for your children. Like, I know as a parent, I would do anything for my children, but I don't want to just do anything. I want to do the best thing, not just anything. I think a lot of parents, the only thing they know is put your kids in school, right? But it's like this. Two things. One, people say, my kids have to go to school because they have to become socialized. Okay. Well, three things, I guess. One, socialized. Two, I have to work all day, so I can't do it. And three, I don't remember anything in school, so I can't teach it to them. So I'm not qualified. Well, three, if you went to school and you don't remember any of it, clearly the school system's not helping from that perspective. Two, if the point is you have to go to work all day, well, what are we seeing right now? Is we're seeing a preview of the future. You're going to be working from home at some point in the future. You need to be aware of that. And you weren't prepared for this reality through the education system. And then the point about your children being socialized, you're going to have to get creative on that anyways, because they're not going back to school for the rest of the school year, at least. They're not going to be there for the summer. And who knows what's going to happen in the next, maybe we'll go back to school next year. But what happens when there's another pandemic? You think this is going to be the last one? There's going to be something else and something else. And eventually the schools are going to be like, why are we wasting all this money on overhead? We had the teachers on Zoom and running the classroom. What the hell are we paying for air conditioning for? They could pay for their own air conditioning at their house. Like, it's going to all start to be put together. And now you're starting to see the elite in the world saying, yeah, we could just do it from home and all this stuff and social distancing. And that's going to turn into like just the norm. So we have to prepare ourselves now. And as parents, you have to really now, I'm telling you, with TechnoTutor, it's just a tiny little part of the day. It's a very tiny little fraction. It's like brushing your teeth. It doesn't take that long, but if you don't do it properly, it has profound implications. And if you do, it has profound implications from that perspective as well. It's a little tiny thing, but it's so profound. And why are we keeping it vague? Because you have to see it for yourself. And what I want is for our distributors to show that you can build not only a way to help other people in a sense of a higher purpose, but you can build financial freedom for yourself through helping other people. So that's another aspect of what we do within this, right? So you have to talk to somebody to find out more about that, right? But there's so many dimensions to this. And I know that this whole situation that's going on right now, instead of looking at it as the world is over, look at it as new opportunities are arising. And we're offering the opportunity now to take care of yourself, to re-educate yourself, to educate your family and so forth, so that you're prepared when things like this happen. You don't have to become one of these preppers out in the woods who just isolates yourself from society. That's not a solution either. Okay, we have to be in society and make things work, taking responsibility for it, because that's the only way that ultimately things are going to work out, is that more and more of us take more and more self-responsibility. So that's really what we're here to support others to do, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the time is now. And have the foresight to hear what Cameron and I are saying is like, the world has shifted. And really, are you going to be the kind of person who just gets into more pain till it gets so excruciating that you're forced to change? Or if you have the eyes to see and the ears to hear, like, reach out, have a conversation.
And one more quick point.
Mm-hmm.
You're seeing a lot of education companies and stuff putting stuff out right now. Because they're like, because they're like, everyone's homeschooling. I got to try to find a way to do that. So someone looking at this might be like, they're just trying to get in on that. I posted on my YouTube channel all the audios and videos that I've done over the past year and a half or two. Some even go back even further. Some of them go back even to 2015. Okay. You can see our interviews that we did on Fox Business and Bloomberg with Donald Trump Jr. back in 2014, where we were saying exactly these same points. So understand where we're coming from. This is something we saw coming. So go back and listen to all my audios, go listen to all my videos, see where we're coming from. And you'll see this is not just, we're just getting your kids to read in school just like everybody else. No, this is like next level. This is like limitless. This is like, you know, going beyond what anyone thought was possible in education, because we're coming from a totally different understanding and perspective, right? That's why we called it the red pill. It's like you're waking up and suddenly you're in a different world. The landscape is different. And now you're trying to get your bearings, but realizing that other people have been doing this and we are already seeing what's occurring. It's not that we're just prescient. We actually seeing it because you can process information so you can see things that others can't see. When you can't process information, when the words are not inside of you in the proper way, you can't see it, right? So that's really what we're doing, is inviting those who see there's a problem, there's got to be a solution, but you don't just want the cookie cutter solution being given to you, because that's why the problem is there. You see what I mean? That's why the problem is being highlighted now, is because there's some solution being offered that's not to your benefit. We have a solution that is to your benefit as the individual, which then is a real benefit to society, not just to those, you know, top 0.1% or so forth. What we're doing is creating the new 1% so that we can have a 100% that's taken care of, not a top down, but a bottom up approach. And it's a 1+1. So that's why I'm suggesting, if you find these points interesting and you want to connect, whether it's with me, whether it's with Mitch, whether you just want to go on the TechnoTutor website and check out more, just do that. Reach out in whatever way you want, because we're looking for those who want to stand up, take self-responsibility first. You know, like they say, put the oxygen mask on yourself first, then you can help others, right? So many people get lost in trying to change the system and trying to help others, but you have to start with yourself. And there's so much more that we can improve about ourselves that will create a stable point within ourselves, where we can then really be a point of stability for others in times of crisis like you're seeing right now. So I really appreciate you doing these videos with me, Mitch. It's a lot of fun, obviously, and I can talk for hours and hours and hours. And I know you have something coming up very shortly here, so I don't want to take up too much more time. But you know, if there's anything else you want to add to that, I'm happy to hear it.
Yeah, just thank you. If I hadn't had TT and came across you guys like 7-8 months ago now, I would be in a very different place.
You know, I'm glad you said that, because I was talking to Katie about this the other day, just not just you, but just everyone that we're working with, including ourselves. I'm like, someone who has TechnoTutor, who's done a little bit of the work with it and is now getting to a point of stability, how you're feeling right now and what you're focusing on in this unprecedented time. I mean, literally, there's never been any, no one's seen this, where it's like they're shutting down society.
Yeah.
It's literally happening. This is not like a movie. This is really happening right now. And to be a stable point of like, I'm not feeling bad. I'm not just like, oh, meditating my way to bliss. No, I mean, I'm doing things. I'm helping people. I'm supporting myself. I'm doing things. But not feeling like, I mean, can you imagine how you would have felt if you had never gotten into TechnoTutor and done all this stuff now? Like, where it made me
afraid.
Like, what would you be doing? Right? You'd be afraid, right? You'd be
Yeah.
totally freaking out.
Yeah.
Right?
I'd be like trying to like make I'd be like trying to make this thing work online, hide behind a computer, go sell e-com stuff. It's like, what difference does that even make? Now I had a guy who I've been meeting with him every day. He just joined with TT, and he's got a kid, and he's like, it's all clicking with him right away. He's like, man, he's like, this was so cool. The other day I was walking around, I was just like seeing things that were always in my environment, but it's like I'm seeing it now. He's like, I'm so excited to get my kid on this. I'm like, and he's like, my girlfriend too. I'm like, cool. Like that level of fulfillment from doing that and supporting people like that versus running an e-com store trying to sell masks to someone that's overpriced or whatever. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Like it just shows character and not to say, oh, I'm so good and my character's so great. It's like, I wish that for anyone who's watching this who's serious, like to have that feeling of knowing I'm actually changing, I'm helping to support other people to change their lives, change their kids' lives, and in turn that ripples to the community. So. Yeah,
I think I don't in any way feel special at all about what I'm doing. I feel lucky, if anything, because TechnoTutor saved my life, you know, and that's a whole video in itself as to how it supported me to be a father and a husband and a business person and so forth, because I use this for myself every single day. I was using it before we got on this call. But I know that there's other people out there that are just like me that want to make a difference. So I don't feel like I'm special in that sense. I know there's a lot of other people that want to make a difference, but the system itself is not going to give us ways to do that. It's going to protect itself. So this is a way for those who are like, no, I really genuinely want to make a difference and do something, make a lot of money, but make a big difference in this world and really fundamentally help other people. This is that thing. This is like that helicopter, you know, that you've been asking for, that's coming in to say, hey, jump on board, right? So yeah, I always love talking to you and everything, but this is a very unique time that we're in right now. I mean, people always say that, but dude, it's taken on a whole new meaning over the past couple of weeks, you know, I have to say. So it's definitely time for the people who have always said they want to make a difference. It's like, well, the time is now. It's here. Now is the time to really see, okay, there are solutions, real solutions that can support people at an individual level to make sure that they're prepared for the future that we are now in. It is now go time. There's no more messing around. Like, it's here. And so this kind of stuff that we're seeing is only going to get worse as automation and all the other things come online. It's just now, this is the catalyst for everyone to be like, okay, yeah, I guess I don't have a problem staying at home. It's like that kind of shocking event where now all the automation and stuff can kind of roll out into where people are going to accept it, right? So that's why it's really time now. So yeah, I appreciate these little videos we're doing. They're a lot of fun. And a lot of people are going to hear them and really see what we're saying and want to investigate further. That's why there's so much online, you know, because in the past I've heard people say, well, there's not a lot online about TechnoTutor. There's a lot there now. Okay. So now you can go and dig and do your research and all that stuff. There's plenty for you to look at and understand, but at the end of the day, you reach out, you connect with someone like Mitch, then you're going to get, okay, here's what it's really all about. So really looking forward to that. So
awesome. All right. Thanks, Kevin. Have a great day,
thanks,
man.
Mitch. We'll talk later. See ya.
Bye.